Didn't say it. But the bad news is we have a really hard time growing out of it. Even Miss Lynn still wants to shout out, "You're not the boss of me." And that's the way life is. And as people of faith, it's no different for us. And it is a very difficult journey to walk in the will of God. And so probably none of us, or very few of us, or very few times in our life have ever shouted out to God, "You're not the boss of me," out of fear. Certainly on a subconscious level, we think that way, or at least the way we behave, we show God that God's not the boss of us. And so it's very important, even as we discover together or remember that we are saved by faith through grace. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. God still has a very high standard for the way we live our lives. We are to walk in the will of God. And if you forget or ever need a refresher course, we read and can reread the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus talks so strongly about his expectations for you and I, and the way that we live our life, especially when it comes to the number one commandment, to love our God with all our heart, mind, and soul. And then the second one, he says, is like the first, to love our neighbor as ourselves. Very high expectations for that. And it's usually our neighbor or usually our spouse, but our neighbor second, that really brings that out of us. You're not the boss of me. You're not the boss of me. And so we're going to look at that over the next weeks together, 6 or 7 weeks together. We're going to look at biblical obedience and what it means to be obedient, and how countercultural that is, and what it means for us as people of faith. And we're going to do that by looking at some writings from the Apostle Paul. And we'll spend a couple weeks or a few weeks with Romans, and then we'll spread out from there and look at a few other writings that he has. But his job and what he's been called to do here, a couple different things to think about before we start to read Paul together. Number one is that Paul is coming at this from a very, very strict Jewish perspective. Remember, Paul was such a good Jewish man that he was persecuting the very, very early and first Christians. He had it in his mind how you were supposed to be and behave, what a man of God looked at. He was very faithful to that, to the point where if you weren't living that way, he'd have a role in having you killed. I mean, he was so strict. And so that's part of Paul's life that he claims, and that's where he's coming from. The second part to think about here, specifically with this writing to the Romans, and all his writings really, is he's been called, he's been set aside by God. And he had a magnificent little story to go along with that conversion moment. But through his conversion, he was called by God to preach obedience to the whole world, not just the Jewish folks, but to the Gentiles as well, especially to the Gentiles. And so he sets out in his travels and his writings and his work to show people what it means to live a life of faith, and not just live a life of faith, but to do it obediently. And so he has his work cut out for him, especially writing this letter to the Romans. And he's writing to Gentiles and Romans. And Rome was a happening place. It was like downtown Manchester in its heyday. Right, TC? You want to get into some trouble? You go downtown Manchester on a Thursday night. That's the way Rome was. And they had all roads lead to Rome, and the Roman roads and all that. I mean, it was just activity from all over the kingdom coming to a head in Rome. Therefore, there were many different people from many different walks of life And so many opportunities to go the wrong way and many false gods. And so to really set the stage for week 1 of this series, You're Not the Boss of Me, think of it this way. Paul's audience, his original audience here in Romans, they were worshiping so many false gods. They had access to so many false gods and false religions that they had total confusion on how to live. Total confusion on how to live. So now, look at your neighbor and say, you're totally confused. And they were. And we are. And so the Romans, if the Romans were totally confused about how to live, it's because they had so many options on how, not just to live, but what gods to serve, and what gods did this, and what gods did that. And so to navigate their life, it was total confusion. All right? And so what's the saying? The more things change, the more things stay, the same, right? I know we've said that before. And that's the case today. I mean, we have so many options. Life is so confusing. And we make, as humans today, in our culture and in our time and place, I mean, we make even the smallest thing confusing. I mean, you try to tell somebody what to do, or you happen to ask, like we had a wedding here yesterday, and Melissa and Garth, a beautiful wedding. But on Friday night, what I told Melissa and Garth down in the office, I said, when we go up here for the rehearsal, I said, it'll be 20 minutes long unless you act confused. And I said, if you hesitate for one moment about what to do next, like where somebody should stand, you're going to get 25 answers about how to do it. And that's a little thing, like where should a bridesmaid stand? And that's how life is. And now with the internet, it's even worse because you Google, I so desperately want to be a manly man. I want to be able to be like Linky. I mean, he's a manly man, right? I want to be like TC. I always use TC, not Linky. And I want to be able to fix things. I want to be able to fix things. And so I want to be able to do plumbing. I want to be able to do repairs around the house. I want to be able to work on my car. And I think I can because of Google. Like, I just Google a problem. And I can watch a video and I can fix our toilet. And then, so now, like Melissa says, if I do that one more time, she's going to take the computer away from me. Because I can't do all things through Google, who strengthens me. And in fact, it costs time and money. One time in a heat wave, the biggest heat wave that we had a couple years ago, I thought it would be a great time to change our thermostat to one of those programmable thermostats. I thought it was awesome. Save money, right? Go green in our house. So I Googled it, and I messed it all up. And the box, the programmable thermostat said a 10-minute job. Literally, it said you can do this in 10 minutes. Literally. Like 4 hours later, it was still 150 degrees in our house. And she was not happy. And she was pregnant, because she always is. And literally, she didn't make me sleep on the couch. They all slept down on the couch. She made me sleep upstairs in the hottest room of the house. I'm not joking about that. She made me. And I listened. I was obedient. 10 minutes, it said. Anyway, I don't even know why I told you that. I've been much more obedient now. I don't know. But anyway, so nothing's changed. It's the same for our faith. We get so confused. We get confused about how it is we're supposed to live our life of faith. And we throw tantrums like this. We go through stages of disobedience. But one of the things that we got to figure out first as Christians is how do we cut through that confusion? Because you can go to any number of churches, there are 100 different churches here in Carroll County, more than that, on any given Sunday, and you'll get different perspectives on, where we have in common Christ died and Christ rose again, and then we get all the different confusions about how it is we're supposed to respond to that. What to wear. You can't wear this. If you wear this, you're going to heaven. If you don't wear this, you're going to hell. Don't sing this. Don't dance. You can drink this amount, but don't drink that amount. Don't curse or smoke, or you're going to hell. Don't do this, or the list goes on and on and on, and you get different perspectives. Pray this way. Go to church on this day. Your preacher should look like this or talk like that. It shouldn't talk like the preacher you have. Those sorts of things. And we'll argue about all that. Just total confusion, even on Sunday mornings in church. Total confusion about how to live our life. So we've got to cut through that. And so we have to navigate those confusing waters. Even before we can think about what it is we're going to be obedient to. Or who we're going to be obedient to. And one of the things that this book of Romans does is a very powerful book. And so be careful as you read it, because it's life-changing for many folks, including John Wesley, who we mentioned last week, as he was reading it. That's when he had his life-changing event. Going back before him, Martin Luther, the great reformer. Many of the ways that we practice our faith today come because of Martin Luther. But this, in verse 17, which we didn't read, but verse 17 was the verse that helped Luther cut through the confusion of faith. And it was a life-changing event for him. And it was, verse 17 says, God's righteousness is being revealed in the gospel from faithfulness for faith. As it is written, the righteous person will live by faith. That's a lot of faith, and it gets confused. Talk about confusion. But basically that's where he figured out that righteousness of being made right with God comes through faith. Not something that, not what he was wearing or what he wasn't wearing, not what he was saying or not saying, but strictly being made right with God was a gift from God, and you obtained it through faith. And so being obedient to that became a gateway for him. And he said it was as if, once he figured that out, it was life-changing, he was reborn, and it was as if the doors of paradise were thrown wide open and he could walk through. In other words, all that confusion about how to live was pushed aside, and he could see his way to paradise. It's as if it was a gateway to heaven. This book of Romans for him, that verse specifically, 17, was a gateway to heaven. And so Paul is going to help us, you and I, and his original audience here, navigate the confusing parts of our religion, the confusing parts of life, cut through all that, and navigate our way to a life in faith. And so the first step is obedience to that faith. And it should be free to us. It should not be... It should free us from the idea that we have to work or earn our way into heaven. And so boundaries and rules are very important, but they need to be held in tension with this idea of faith and grace. And when we can do that, and we can walk in the middle there, that's when we can walk in the will of God. But it should be very freeing to us. And it starts with being obedient to faith. And what that really means for us is giving all of ourselves over to God and trusting that God's going to take control of our steps through this chaos and confusion. God's going to take care of our actions. God's going to set us up to love ourselves and our neighbors the same, and to love God with all our heart, mind, and soul. It's a great day to talk about this on Father's Day. Fathers play a humongous part in helping kids be trained up in obedience to faith. In fact, just simply showing up. TC being here today, Dan being here today. Dan being here today is almost, statistically, almost a guarantee that Maddie will be here when she's 30 years old. Just Dan doesn't have to do anything. He doesn't do anything. He just shows up. He's leaving in the middle of the sermon. But just being here, statistically, this is no joke. It's not rocket science. Being here, TC being here, Linky being here, Jim being here. It's a guarantee, almost a guarantee, that the kids that see that are going to be here and I don't just mean here in the church, but in a life of faith with Christ when they're adults. And so our fathers, our grandfathers, our father figures, Lanky, all jokes aside, is a father figure to all the little ones running around here. And so that's important, an important role. And Paul appeals to that as well. It's that generational thing that a lot of times we buck as humans. You know, we don't want to hear what the quote-unquote old men of the community say. We don't want to hear what Mike has to say as kids. That's the old way of doing things. But sometimes it's the old way that sets the boundaries, not to lock us into a prison, but to help protect us and to prepare us for whatever life brings before us in the future. And faith is not any different in that way. And Paul links the past, right there in the beginning of the letter, links the past to the work that's now being done in Christ, to that present congregation in Rome, and to us in the future as well. And it's that important link. A lot of times we'll throw a tantrum, we'll be just like this little girl, and we don't want to listen to it. But thankfully, and when our fathers, our grandfathers, our father figures don't give up on us, it plays a huge impact on us being obedient to the faith. I have a clip here to kind of think about. Do we, Debbie?
I'm trying.
How easy it is for us to forget what it was like when we were once family. The times we shared. How easy it is for us to forget and love. How easy it is for us to forget how to smile. It's easy to forget. But it's even harder not to love. Family is forever.
I don't know what they're advertising. It's probably something illegal, but it worked for our purposes. And the young person there being disobedient or not liking the boundaries that were set, like many of us growing up. But the father never gives up on him or doesn't give up on him, and in fact carries him back to life, basically. And it's a great image to think about. Thankfully, our God, the Father, never gives up on us, no matter how much we push back, whether it's at your age or my age or even as old as Miss Lynn. At every season of life, we push back, and we don't like the boundaries of a life of faith, only when it's convenient for us. But thankfully, God never gives up on us. And at times, just like this video, carries us, even when we haven't acknowledged the need for it yet. It's a beautiful story there, but most importantly, it points us to God the Father, who wants us to be obedient in our faith, and when we're not, is patient and never gives up on us. And so as we start this series, Obedience, or You're Not the Boss of Me, we start with the fact that we have a loving and patient God that is going to work with us and carry us and encourage us along the way as we learn to be obedient in our faith. Amen?
Amen.